Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me here. And thank you all for this bright and early 8 a.m. speech. That's really something else. I must say, before I start and get into any formalities, one aspect of the speech was unprepared. I was at the JIC function last night and this morning. I didn't realize it seems a Grace Kennedy policy that you have to have a joke to tell when you're on the speech. And the jokes have been actually very good. I was very impressed. So I did not bring a joke, but I may think of one before the end of the speech. But again, in all seriousness, thanks again for having me here. And I know we're speaking with Grace Kennedy colleagues worldwide. And I look at this as a real privilege and honor to talk with you guys a little bit. Mr. Orain really asked me, and he kept me brief, so I only have 20 minutes. So that's for better or worse. You don't have to listen to me for too long. But, I really wanted to spend some time talking a little bit about really key distinctions and personal lessons over the last 31 years that I've gleaned to really, I think, try and be a role model for younger Jamaicans and people that are coming up, and certainly, hopefully, I think also inspire you guys in some small ways as well. So I hope most of you would have received a background overview on AP Capital and a little bit of background on myself and my partner. I will spend a brief amount of time going through that because I wanted to really get into some very personal things that I wanted to share with you guys today. But as Mr. Orain shared with you, I grew up in Spanish Town, which I hear these days. Obviously, I left Jamaica 16 years ago. My permanent address was still in Jamaica until 4 years ago when I officially settled in Florida. But through the time in college and working on Wall Street for a little bit, Spanish Town was home. And obviously, I've been watching the stories, and here it may be a little different Spanish Town today than it was 15 years ago. But really, after leaving Jamaica and spending a lot of time playing sports, football is my passion. And notwithstanding the Reggae Boys performance, track and field as well. And so Usain Bolt has obviously been a great source of pride for everybody that will listen to me when I talk. I spent some time at Harvard University, and really it was the move from Campion to Harvard and to study economics is really where I started to crystallize some of the lessons and the distinctions that I'm going to share with you guys today. But after Harvard, just very, very briefly, and actually during Harvard, I ran and sold a dot-com business. And felt as if at that time I learned a lot of what not to do as a 19-year-old CEO, growing a business, raising venture capital, hiring 35 people whose mortgages and kids' tuition depended on me. And really, I think we tripled the size of the firm in 3 weeks. And really, that lesson was the start of some of the key distinctions that I'm going to share with you today. After that, I spent some time on Wall Street at a couple of firms I know you guys are probably familiar with, UBS, Warburg, and after that, Bear Stearns briefly. And again, this was back in 2000 and 2001, so not in 07, 08, or 09. But after that, started AP Capital, and as Mr. Orain shared with you, approached Grace Kennedy to help my partner and I realize our dreams, and that was in 2003. So with that brief background, let me dive into a little bit about AP Capital just to quantify some additional details of really what we have done, which sets the backdrop for some of what I'm going to share with you here this morning. The firm we started is a private equity firm defined as investing capital in private businesses, i.e. they're not listed on exchanges, but are growing very, very well. It's not a venture capital firm, so we don't invest in napkins and ideas to create the next Google. We really invest in a healthy business that is just not listed on the exchange, and we believe could potentially be listed on the US exchanges in the future. That's a part of our exit strategy for investors. It doesn't have to be the only way that we exit the business. We can do a dividend recap, as we did, to return some money to Grace Kennedy because the company had grown so fast. And just to put it in context, in the US today, we're certainly not the only private equity firm, but we're one of very, very few private equity firms that's 100% owned by minorities, ethnic minorities in the US. So that's African Americans, Hispanic, Indians, etc. And we're actually one of only 3 that have been able to raise funds and grow a $1 billion portfolio that is a firm wholly owned by ethnic minorities. So we take some pride in that, especially in the context of the US being a very large and competitive market. What we've also been able to do in 7 years, we started the firm, set up shop in 2003, and Grace Kennedy was kind enough to be one of our first supporters to help us realize our dream. But things really got going for us in 2004 when we found our first business to invest in. And that business at the time was generating 60 million US dollars in revenue. And at the end of 2010, with that first acquisition in late 2004, so really what is 6 years' time, we've created a portfolio that, if you added up all of the businesses in our portfolio, generated over 1.2 billion US in revenue, created 3,500 jobs in 15 countries around the world. That is the US, Canada, UK, a lot of Scandinavian countries, etc. And that is also job growth through the 2007, 2008, and 2009 financial crises. And perhaps very, very importantly, the values of Grace Kennedy align a lot with ours. Employees, we shared with you the growth in employees. We've also created, in that group of employees, we've created about 1,000 people who have made in excess of $250,000 in bonuses or profits or net worth, US dollars, over the last 6 years. So we think we're in the process of creating wealth for our employees. And also, I'd say very, very importantly, last but certainly not least, investors in AP Capital have generated an average of 16 times their original investment in the last 7 or 8 years if you had invested in every single deal that we did over the last 6 years. And that works out to a 59% return on your money annually. So those are some of the sort of quantifiable successes that we wanted to just sort of put as the framework for what I'm going to get into here for you today. And very importantly, it would be remiss of me to say our goal, because we certainly have no intention of stopping, we would like to continue the process of job growth and job creation, certainly in global markets, hopefully even more so in Jamaica. But our goal is to have a portfolio in 5 years that generates 10 billion US in revenue and continues to deliver the same type of returns for all of our shareholders as well. So that just gives you some of the backdrop to really here getting into what I call key lessons and distinctions that I've learned along the way. And I'll be the first to tell you, in keeping with one of these 7 distinctions that I'm going to share with you this morning, I'll be the first to tell you a lot of this is really an amalgamation of some of the best advice I have received from my mentors along the way. And that's one of the things I believe in very, very passionately, is finding your own personal board of advisors in your own career, and in your own lives as well. So let me dive right into these key distinctions here for you. And I really look forward to spending as much time as possible on Q&A and hearing and addressing any questions or clarifying comments that you guys may have. The first one I have to cite, and I went to Harvard, so you know that this study has to be very good for me to cite it, but it was a Yale University study, right, that I have to cite, which speaks about the importance of planning. And the quote that I wanted to share, these are 7 bullet points. I realize the chairman also recently gave a speech at the university with the same sort of career advice, and it just so happened that he also outlined 7 points as well. So I didn't steal any of his points. I wrote the speech before I saw his on the Grace Kennedy website, but there's some similarity there. The first one is, he who fails to plan, plans to fail. right? And the study I was referring to took a profile of the class of 1960 at Yale University, and the keynote speaker asked them to write down in as vivid detail as possible what the goals are of their life over the next 40 years. And when the research team 40 years later analyzed the results, they realized that the top 3% of the successful people in that graduating class were the only 3% that actually took the time to write down in as clear detail as possible what it is that they want to accomplish in their life, by 65. And I thought that was very, very interesting. And personally for me, I'm copious with my notebook and write down as much as possible. For some of you who are medically inclined, there's actually a relationship, that the brain forms, with the information when you actually write it down. And it sounds cliche, and I know a lot of people hear it before, but it's actually very true that writing things down actually is the first step in the process of actually making it happen. There's only so much you can keep in your brain for your brain to remember. The second sort of distinction that I wanted to share with you, and each of these I'm going to relate to something personal in my life as well. That first one, actually, before I go on to the second, when I was 15 years old, I wrote down where I wanted to be when I was 30. And I've exceeded it in certain aspects, one or two aspects maybe not so. I actually had aspirations of playing in a World Cup. That never really worked out, but that's not only my doing, right? I need a whole team. But as far as the financial and the career goals were concerned, it's actually scary how close I was to accomplishing that, slightly exceeding where I wanted to be. But at 15 years old, before I went to college, while I was at Campion studying the Grace Kennedy annual report to invest in some companies here in Jamaica, these are some of the goals that I was setting for myself at 15. The second point I wanted to share here is that the quality of your life, and that is in business, in your career, and personally, is a direct result of the expectations of your peer group. So in Jamaican parlance, birds of a feather flock together, right? And there's a lot that can be learned from the 5 or 7 people that you spend the most time with. And that is not to say you should abandon your friends that are not as ambitious as you are growing up, but you actually need to make sure that you recognize that you need to be surrounding yourself with people who are thinking of the same mind and can support you in getting where you want to go. And that goes for your happiness, your financial success, the income you're going to create, the values that you have for your own life and how you deal with other people. All of those aspects are very, very influenced by your peer group and the people you spend a lot of time with. That could be family members, business colleagues, etc. And for me, personally, that held very, very true. I was at Campion College, fortunate enough to play on the under 17 football team for the Reggae Boys and the under 21 team. And I actually also, ran track and field when I was at St. Andrew Prep and had 2 national records that I can tell you, Usain Bolt didn't break, but he didn't start running track as early as I did. So, but the very, very telling thing is when I got that opportunity, which was a blessing to play for Jamaica, I obviously spent a lot of time. Some of my best friends, while playing on the under 17 team, went to various primary schools, around the country. One of my closest buddies on the team actually, grew up in Matches Lane, behind St. George's and Tex Lane, and he's not here with us today. Because obviously took different decisions in life, and this is somebody that I tried to help, at various stages in his life, but certainly trying to be a positive influence for him and not spending as much time with him. I would think that his life may have been different today if he was surrounding himself with, different people. And this is somebody that when I was 14 or 15, I spent a lot of time with. We were traveling, to a lot of international countries, playing for Jamaica, representing Jamaica, trying to make it to the Youth World Cup. spent a lot of time in Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador, playing in the CONCACAF tournaments, and it's a very telling example.